Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. I am joined by Lynda Tren, who I haven't seen in a few weeks.
I was skiing with the kids, getting the goggles tan.
Ooh, that sounds
refreshing
fun.
myself, but I'm glad to be back in the chair with you.
Skiing down the slopes?
Down the slopes.
Ski thing.
Breathing the mountain air. Oh man, Robby, you're missing out. We'll have that conversation off camera. But in the meantime, what's on your radar?
Well, Lynda, another day, another desperate effort by a mainstream media mouthpiece to spin the story of President Joe Biden's cognitive decline as anything other than a failure of journalism itself. Well, I've been talking about this all week because Alex Thompson of Axios correctly chided his colleagues in the mainstream media for failing to properly cover this story as he accepted an award for his own coverage at the White House Correspondents' Dinner over the weekend. Thompson's frankness is apparently producing apoplectic rage among some in the media class. Consider Chuck Todd, former host of NBC's Meet the Press program, who was unusually strident when tackling the subject on Chris Cillizza's podcast.
This is not a media failure. This is a failure of the Democratic Party. And I just sort of the virtue signaling that some people have done to try to say that the media missed this story. They didn't miss this story. David Ignatius wrote, I just refuse to accept this stupid premise because it's a manufactured right-wing premise in order to stain the media. The media's got plenty of things to attack them for, and there are MSNBC and CNN and pundits that absolutely carried water for Joe Biden.
Really? Well, look, first of all, it's kind of hard to tell the journalists and the pundits apart these days. Cable news is full of programs that mix news and opinion and feature guests and panelists who straddle that line. For instance, how would you classify MSNBC host Jen Psaki? Is she a journalist? Is she a pundit? Ex-Biden White House staffer? All three things? This is a tricky game. The fact of the matter is, however, no matter how you tally the score, mainstream personalities, journalists, commentators, etc., either missed the story of Biden's cognitive decline or were hesitant to look into it too closely. When conservatives really started venting about how old and out of it Biden appeared on camera, mainstream media didn't just ignore the story, they adopted the framing of Biden's defenders and pushed the idea that conservatives were making it up. In June, when Biden's appearances at a slew of public events were raising questions, the media ran headline after headline berating Republicans for trying to make this a thing. The Washington Post repeatedly slammed misleading videos purporting to show Biden flailing. And the New York Times similarly chose the word misleading for its headlines on this subject. A few weeks earlier, the New York Times, I kid you not, had actually published an article with the following headline: "For Joe Biden, what seems like age might instead be style." You can't make this up. By the way, are New York Times reporters not pundits? Chuck Todd is drawing an imaginary distinction. But even if we accept his definitions, yes, journalists were carrying water for Biden surrogates, trying desperately to cover up the sitting president's cognitive decline. I should point out that NBC News, which was Chuck Todd's own network, did the same thing. They had news reporters cover the Biden videos in the way the Biden people wanted them to. But Chuck Todd thinks blame lies solely with the actual Biden people. Let's watch.
This was not that failure. This is an attempt by some to virtue signal, and it's this horrible sort of pitting different news organizations against each other, when ultimately the people at fault are Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Jill Biden, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, every elected member of Congress.
To be clear, you should definitely be really angry with all those folks. They should be treated as discredited and never listened to again. But why is it so hard for members of the media to admit that at best they got taken for a ride by all those jokers? And at worst, well, they knew exactly what was really going on. So, Lynda, I've been talking about this all week. I was at the White House Correspondents' Dinner when Alex Thompson made those remarks. Correctly, I thought, scolding his fellow media class for missing this story. I was surprised by the defiance of Chuck Todd there. It wasn't just that the political officials stonewall. The political officials did stonewall, but it's the press's job to ask these difficult and uncomfortable questions, and they didn't. And not only did they not ask those questions, there were all those headlines accusing people like myself and other people on the right of trying to, gaslight the American people. They were the one doing the gaslighting. They were covering for a president who was gone. And I'm still really angry about it.
I can tell, Robby, and I'm not surprised, of course, at all to hear that this is your perspective. And we did talk about it a few weeks ago as well.
I wake up every day and I want to talk about it more. I'll never stop.
You're entitled. But I will say this. I think multiple things can be true at the same time. I do recall seeing videos that looked clearly doctored, right, that showed things like, Joe Biden is tripping or doing some other sort of thing that you would expect of somebody who's of senior age. And those were clearly intended to mislead. So some of those headlines may be referring to that kind of thing, and that could be true. The other thing is, and I'm going to give you a little bit of the insidery perspective here, is that depending on who you were, when you interacted with him, and whether or not, especially you're behind closed doors taking, fire from the president and being asked very difficult questions, your perception was very different. So I think all of these things can be true. Now that said, he's somebody of advanced age, and I would ask the same questions of the current president, who is also of advanced age, and urge journalists to keep an eye on that as well.
Well, I trust our media class to hold Donald Trump to account, sure. I think if Trump was evincing any of this kind of behavior, I mean, there are negative Trump articles written, a gazillion of them every single day. I think I saw a report from the Media Research Center that in the first 100 days, 93% of mainstream reporting on Donald Trump has been entirely negative, whereas about 60% of the reporting on Biden during the first 100 days was entirely positive. So I trust our media to hold Trump to account. I think that's a good thing. They do a perfectly adequate job of that and then some. What I don't necessarily trust them now is to hold a Democrat's feet to the fire. I think they thought looking into this story too closely would risk bringing back Donald Trump. But now we got Donald Trump back anyway, and now no one trusts the media. I mean,
I think it's a fair argument to be made. I will say that comparing the first 100 days of this administration and the first 100 days of the last administration, I would fully expect there to be a lot of negative coverage, especially given where we're seeing the economic numbers, people worried about their retirement savings and what sort of public services they're going to receive. So, I mean, that's one piece of it. But I also think the thing of greater concern right now is less the media, it's members of Congress and whether they're going to hold this president to account. We just saw, for example, Representative from Washington State, Adam Smith, tried to move for an inquiry, which is supposed to be part of the democratic process when you are in the minority to be able to ask questions about what you're seeing from the administration, and you have a House-led Congress batting that down and trying to change the rules. So these are the things. I think we should be having this kind of an open debate, much like you and I have on a regular basis. Maybe people should just be following our model, but I think we're not seeing enough of that.
All right, next up on Rising, Trump is firing back at the Democrat who filed impeachment articles against him. We'll discuss. It was only a matter of time. Congressman Shri Thanedar of Michigan has introduced 7 articles of impeachment against Donald Trump.
Here he is explaining his reasoning.
Donald Trump has already done real damage to our democracy, but defying a unanimous 9-0 Supreme Court ruling, that has to be the final straw. It's time we impeach Donald J. Trump. The court said the wrongfully deported Kilmer Garcia must be allowed to return and receive due process. Trump ignored it. He ignored the Constitution. He ignored the very checks and balances that keep our democracy intact.
Trump responded during his rally in Michigan last night. Let's listen.
What the hell did I do? Here we go again. They want to impeach me. This lunatic. This lunatic, he was up. Actually, I had the television way down, and I said to our great First Lady, listen, did I just hear I was being impeached again? We're getting good at this, though. No, they've gone totally crazy.
Congressman Ted Cruz wrote on X, impressive, the third impeachment attempt is less serious than the second, which was less serious than the first. Democrats are rudderless.
Meanwhile, Executive Director for Project Liberal, Joshua Eakel, wrote, thanks for doing this, Congressman.
So here we are. This was entirely inevitable. This is going to go absolutely nowhere. We should point out Republicans control the House and the Senate. There will not be enough votes to actually impeach the president. There will not be enough votes to have a trial for him again in the Senate. This is going absolutely nowhere. This figure, who I had never heard of before, like I think most people, until he started to inject himself into the news cycle by doing this, Shri Thanedar, he's a Michigan congressman who has a kind of I would say, colorful and controversial history. Actually, it's been alleged that by firms he consulted with before he ran for office that it was unclear whether he was going to run as a Republican or a Democrat. He actually ran for governor as well, and there's some really dicey stuff in his past. He ran this science-based company that was alleged to have done a lot of animal abuse on animals that were kept in it. So anyway, that's neither here nor there regarding the impeachment charges. What do you make of it?
Well, I think there are two sides to this. So on the one hand, the Democratic base is screaming out for voices in the Democratic Party to directly take on this president, and in theory, this is one of the ways to do it. But to your point, Robby, when you're one of 435 members of Congress and you haven't made a name for yourself, that's another thing that I'm sure that this member was thinking about. You stand out when you make this kind of a case, you know you're going to get interviews, et cetera, et cetera. So from a political strategy piece of it.
Dollar signs, Lynda. He's going to raise lots of donations. In terms of the articles of impeachment themselves, so what this is based on, he thinks it's an impeachable offense that, again, this narrative that Donald Trump is ignoring the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court order was to facilitate the return of this individual, and the Trump administration has taken the position, well, we are doing our best to facilitate his return, but that is not possible to do given that he is in another country's prison. Now, I personally, Lynda, support his return to the country, and then he should be deported elsewhere. The judge's order was that he should not be deported to El Salvador. They've admitted they got that wrong. Fine, bring him back, deport him somewhere else. I fully believe that he is a member of MS-13 and should not be in this country, but they should try to facilitate his return. They're saying they are trying to facilitate his return, but that our entire, foreign policy with another country cannot be subject, this is not the only issue there is. So you can say they're not making a good faith effort to facilitate his return. The idea that this is already an impeachable thing, that Donald Trump has directly ignored some court order, I just don't agree with that. I just don't see it.
Well, so that was one of the things. I mean, one of the other items for critique as part of the motion that he filed was an allegation that the president is not putting our national security interests at heart by backing Pete Hegseth, the whole Signalgate controversy of sharing classified military plans on a unsecure network, those sorts of things, which I think are valid, and obviously this administration doesn't want to talk about. So those are challenges. I think the other thing is, on the point you were making, Robby, is that, I don't know who the they is, if it's the administration saying that, they are working on this. By Donald Trump's own words in an interview he did last night with ABC News, he said with one phone call, he could bring this individual back. He's just choosing not to.
In terms of the Pentagon stuff, the Hegseth stuff, look, I think Mike Walls should be held accountable for the leak. If it's something was done wrong here, again, maybe it's on Hegseth. I don't know that's on Donald Trump. I don't know that that's you hired someone who's doing not a good job. That's an impeachable offense. I mean, that would be, every president should be impeached for that. By the way, maybe just every president should be impeached because they've never done.
You just want total anarchy. No more.
Well, I want our presidents, all thrown out. And actually, I would say the basis on which to impeach Donald Trump is the same basis on which Joe Biden and Barack Obama and George Bush and probably every president for the last however many years should be impeached is just usurping Congress's powers overall and powers in terms of foreign policy. What was revealed in that signal chat was that we were clearly going to war with the Houthis. That's not declared by Congress, but right. Donald Trump is not alone in that respect whatsoever. Most of our presidents, over the course of our lifetimes, Lynda, have conducted what I would argue are military, not just military exercises, but attacks, wars against foreign powers without the authorization of Congress. Congress, for whatever reason, has no interest in doing their job, no interest in claiming back the power that our founders gave them to make these kinds of determinations. So I don't know what you do with that. But the case for impeaching Trump is the case for impeaching all presidents, and that they've all usurped powers that belong to Congress.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree with a lot of the points that you're making there. But I think on the Pete Hegseth side of things, when you're the boss of the bosses, the buck stops with you. And if you say, essentially, it's okay by me, I mean, I told them don't use Signal anymore, but it's not a big deal, you're sending a really significant message message to the American people, to the men and women who serve in our armed forces, to the entire Department of Defense writ large, that it's okay. And if you think about it, these are people who literally sit every single year on polygraphs to make sure they have access to classified materials. They have to operate under a very, very strict set of rules. And if the person who is sitting in the chair as the Secretary of Defense is not held to account, that's a problem. And that's bad for national security.
I would say the optics of this, I guess this makes everyone happy, right? The Democrats have a new resistance figure who's doing something, even if it's going to be totally, completely, wildly unsuccessful. Here's someone, to celebrate who's doing something. I think conservatives are actually salivating at they love when Trump comes under attack because they love defending him. And, this is someone who is going to speak to the conservative narrative. I am not claiming this, to be clear, but conservatives say, we're under attack by foreign forces who want to come in here and take over our elections. This is someone who was born in another country, who speaks with a heavy accent from another country. Conservatives will love the idea of Trump coming under attack by some foreign-born person. They love the optics of that.
It's definitely a balance for the Democratic Party, right?
Yeah.
There are some really significant substantive debates and discussions to be had. I would argue, you've heard me argue, primarily around the economy and the numbers that we're seeing and the very real fears that economists are saying that we should have about an impending recession. Those are the things that I think most people care about. I mean, most people aren't in the bubble with you and me. I mean, how long we've been in this bubble even together here? And we're just diving into all the nitty-gritty details of this policy, that policy. Most people are not like that. They're worried about the price of eggs, they're worried about their rent, and they want to see an administration that is doing something about that. So one would argue, especially as a Democrat, that this president has failed to deliver on the thing that he promised most on the campaign trail, bringing down prices, strengthening the economy, et cetera, and yet we're distracted by certain things as Democrats making the critique.
Next up, Mark Zuckerberg is raising some eyebrows after he revealed he has an underground tunnel. Secret tunnel. You know the Secret Tunnel song? We'll discuss. That's coming up next. Meta's Mark Zuckerberg's latest interview with comedian Theo is making the rounds.
Zuckerberg caught people's attention with this comment.
California. You're like a damn emperor, dude. Does that feel like that ever?
No.
Oh, yeah. I would have a chopper. I don't even know what I would have. I would have an underground tunnel, even that it came right back up next to where it started.
I do have an underground tunnel.
Do you really?
Yeah.
In USA?
I have this ranch in Kauai, where there's this whole thing where people were like, there's this whole meme about how people are saying I built this like bunker underground. It's like more of underground storage
Bring it
situation.
Zuckerberg also discussed the internet calling him a robot.
Have you ever felt socially awkward over your years?
No, I'm really smooth.
Okay.
No, obviously. Yes. Yeah, I'm like the most awkward person. People have been calling me a robot online for 20 years. It does wonders for my confidence.
We're all like awkward in different ways. You put you in certain environments and you're not at all. But I think it's interesting that
I haven't found those environments yet, but maybe, it's...
Well, dude,
Zuckerberg also criticized the university system.
I'm not sure that college is preparing people for like the jobs that they need to have today. I mean, I think that's like there's a big issue on that, and like all the student debt issues are like really big issues. I mean, if it's not preparing you for the jobs that you need and you're kind of starting off in this big hole, then I think that's not good. I mean, that I think there's going to have to be a reckoning with. And
it's a good point.
People are.
So I made the Avatar: The Last Airbender secret tunnel joke when we previewed this in a different segment. So this time I'll ask a different question. I wonder
I didn't get that reference.
No, you didn't get that one, but you made one that I love even more. Perhaps in this underground bunker, there's a man entering a code into a computer every 108 minutes, 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42.
For the hatch.
I think that's what's going on. You all know what I'm talking about. Zuckerberg has come off less and less awkwardly the more interviews he does.
Yeah, especially I feel like the podcast format really works for him. He gets to relax a little bit and dig into it.
I think he's loving life. I think he's just a happier man now for some reason. When he's stopped trying to, he's just admitted that, okay, Facebook can't moderate everything liberals disagree with, so we're not even going to try. That was a stupid idea. He admitted defeat on a couple ideological battles that I think have made him a happier person. We're not going to try to remove...
No fact-checking.
Well, they're going to move toward fact-checking like X, where you can do community notes. There's still fact-checking, Lynda. It's just not going to be non-fact censorship on topics where the facts are under dispute.
And here I was just going to say
problem.
it's the wisdom of age.
Yeah.
I think you just get more comfortable in your skin as you go along.
Well, he's found a look for him that works.
Yeah.
A kind of...
Much more casual.
Yeah, a more casual look. Yeah, I've talked about this a lot on Rising. He and other tech leaders have gotten more positively toward Donald Trump, and it has improved their mental health because they're less combative with the Trump administration. Now, Zuckerberg has been going through this court case regarding Meta's monopoly status with the FTC. I find this case actually completely ridiculous, and really does speak to, in my view, some of the antitrust stuff not making a lot of sense. You can make maybe you could have made it, 4 years ago or whenever the FTC action originated, that Meta looked like a monopoly at that time because of the acquisition of WhatsApp and Instagram. Does Facebook look like a monopoly today at all? It's clearly not.
Photo album, essentially, right? And it's more older folks that are using it.
Yes, it suffers robust competition from a variety of other platforms in a variety of services. Like, what even is it? It's a compendium of your photos from your childhood, which maybe it has a monopoly on that, or maybe Instagram has a monopoly on that. But what power does that give it? Not very much. It doesn't have a monopoly.
Really interesting reels now, and for me personally, it's serving me like ski tips and home decor.
Right.
So clearly, it's doing something right.
Right, but it hasn't cornered the market on that in some way that is threatening. Do you know what I mean?
Sure, yeah.
It competes with TikTok just for your attention. It's competing against every other thing for your attention. So the idea that it is some unwieldy, impossible monopoly has not fared well over time, and I think speaks to the anti-tech mindset of some of these regulators. There has been such creative destruction in the tech sphere over the course of our lifetimes, whereas you have some company that looks like it's totally dominating, and then in a year it's gone. So look at Yahoo, look at MySpace, look at every last thing. I remember when I was a kid being totally addicted to, what was it, AOL Instant Messenger? Do you remember that one?
AIM, of course.
Now I couldn't imagine.
That's how I found out about 9/11, by the way. I was messaging my friends
that went
in
hard.
New York.
Yeah.
I know this. I just took this in a very dark.
We went
place.
9/11, yeah.
Yeah, but it was on 9/11, and
no, you're right. Actually, I was messaging same thing. I was messaging
Keeping
my
contact
friends
with
on
them.
AIM about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And today it's nothing. It's gone.
Today it doesn't exist.
Same thing with MySpace. Same things, honestly, with Facebook. The way I used Facebook 15 years ago to actually talk to friends and have conversations. Right now, that's all moved completely to X, or even moved off X. There could be some people are on Blue Sky. We're making video commentary on YouTube. That gets posted a bunch of other places too. It's just there's
a whole
fragmentation.
movie centered around AOL. Do you remember it?
No, which one?
Not Sleepless in Seattle. The one with Tom Hanks.
Oh, You've Got Mail?
You've Got Mail.
You've Got
was
Mail.
AOL. I
Yeah.
mean, that's how dominant it was then.
Yeah, but it's not dominant now. Waiting for creative destruction in the marketplace was just fine, and so I would urge the FTC to not do silly things like that. All right, more Rising right after this.
In 100 days, we have delivered the most profound change in Washington in nearly 100 years. This is the best, they say, 100-day start of any president in history, and everyone is saying it. We've just gotten started. You haven't even seen anything yet. It's all just kicking in.
He's just getting started. The president making those remarks at a rally in Michigan on Tuesday night to cap off the first 100 days of his second term. But poll after poll shows voters might not be as enthusiastic about the first 100 days as the president is. The latest, a poll from Decision Desk HQ, shows a dismal approval rating. Just 44% approve of how the president is handling his job. That's about a 5% dip since the end of January. Now, 56% say they disapprove. But President Trump was defiant last night, insisting the poll numbers were incorrect. Take a listen.
When you watch the fake news, you see fake polls. Again, they poll more Democrats than Republicans. Democrats aren't going to say, I'm going to vote for Trump. And we still got 45, 44%. But on the legitimate polls, I think we're in the 60s. I think we're in the 60s or 70s or something.
For more on the president's 100-day report card, we're bringing in Director of Data Science at Decision Desk HQ, Scott Tranter. Thanks for joining me, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
So, the 5-point dip in Trump's approval rating over the last couple weeks, what do you attribute that to? And maybe you can put that in historical context. Just how bad is that given other presidents and Trump previously in his first 100 days?
Well, to his credit, he's doing a little bit better in his second term's first 100 days than he did in his first term. I think that's largely because, look, this election, he won the popular vote. So he started with a stronger base. His voters are a little bit more willing to give him some leeway. And out of the top two issues that voters voted on, immigration and the economy, I'm sure we're going to talk about, but immigration is something that he's moving on, and he's keeping a lot of his voters there.
Well, let's talk about the economy. Obviously, the tariff tariff fights over the last few weeks. Is that an issue that has really dipped his support? I'm seeing from this poll, 64% say tariffs will, in fact, hurt the economy. It's certainly an issue where other Republican leaders, media figures, et cetera, are way less willing to just say, oh, yeah, Trump's right about this, as they are in so many other subjects. What insights do we have on the tariff policy from the polling?
It's 64%. Rarely do we see anything that high, especially on an issue like that. And that tells me it's a bipartisan issue. Republicans, Democrats, independents all are worried about tariffs, and they're worried about how it's going to affect them. This isn't anything new. I mean, this is arguably why Donald Trump won the presidency last fall, because that was the number one issue on voters' minds. It's obviously their number one issue now. Donald Trump is making the case that these changes are going to make a long-term, lasting effect. Right now, the voters are saying we're not so sure about that.
There is emerging some interesting partisan splits since the election. We've been talking a lot about on rising young men moving, so young people in general, but especially young men of any racial category, but young men moving so decisively into the MAGA column. I notice in this poll you're seeing emerging just a split between men and women in general, with men being much more supportive of the president's policies.
Yeah, no, our poll's shown that. Quite a few of the other polls released over the last couple of weeks have shown that as well. There's an interesting poll out of Yale that supports what you were saying about the youth vote. Not since Barack Obama in 2008 have we seen a presidential candidate have this type of branding among the youth vote. Now, he didn't necessarily get as many as the youth vote as Barack Obama did back in 2008, but we're certainly picking up their diversions. And it's not just us. Lots of polls across the spectrum are seeing young men specifically skewing a little bit more conservative than the trends have seen in the past.
So I think a lot of people in the media are processing this poll and other polls and saying, oh, it's so bad for Trump. You know, the wheels are already falling off the carriage or the cart or whatever it is. It's all bad. I look at some of this and say, well, there's a lot of frustration, maybe in particular with the economic policy, but if the economy improves, if the goal of the tariff negotiations, for instance, as some people in the administration say, is actually to get other countries to lower their tariffs as well and get rid of all those barriers to trade, if you have a positive economic situation a couple months from now with tariffs no longer being in place, it seems like that's a lot of the negative polling is just that. You would have maybe a reversal of these bad poll numbers.
Yeah, no, look, it's the president and his messengers are basically saying the right things. They are doing this because they want to make things more affordable. They want everyone to buy a house. They want everyone to be able to go on vacation. They want wages to increase. What's the incongruency is their strategy is at least viewed by the voters right now as not necessarily gonna bear that out. It's interesting. You said, hey, if the tariffs are reversed, then all this can be done. Tariffs are self-inflicted. President Trump didn't have to do the tariffs, and I think that's what's getting some of the voters a little bit nervous. But as you point out, if he just snaps it back, I tend to agree with you. The numbers are probably going to go back in his favor.
Let's talk about some of the other actions Trump is taking and how voters feel about them. The deportations have gotten a lot of media attention. Immigration always being probably Trump's number one best issue. There's a clear public mandate to do more to get illegal immigrants out of the country. That shows up in polling results time and time again. What did your polling show with respect to how the American people are receiving these deportations that so many in the media are saying, well, this violates due process, this violates all of these things? Is that the sense of the voters?
Yeah, as always, immigration taken wholeheartedly. Americans, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, wanted immigration to be controlled. And now we're actually getting into the controlled part, and that's where some of the opinions diverging. We've been debating a lot of the definition of due process over the last week or two, and depending on how you phrase the question with the voters, you get a mixed bag. I think by and large, the polling shows that voters are basically approving of what the president is doing on immigration, but has some nervousness or queasiness around how quickly he's doing it, or how forcefully he's doing it. Again, like the economy, his base is going to give him a long leash on this, which is why he's seen some of this.
Yeah, and the partisan split on this question, so 64% saying protesting is not grounds to cancel the visas of international students. That's all respondents, but just 37% of Republicans thought that, and 87% of Democrats and 67% of independents.
Yeah, look, and it's interesting, the way we phrase that question is civil disobedience, right? So there's a definition there. When the voter hears that, they say, okay, they must be doing sit-ins or loud protests or something like that. People's opinions change once you start destroying property, once you start doing violence and things like that. But I think, look, America is steeped in tradition of protest and multivariate views and things like that. So the base case is, and you see that in the independence numbers, is, look, let these students at least be civil disobedient and in protest. But once it crosses the line to violence and felonies, things like that, we see the opinion change quite a bit.
Some of the most unpopular things that Trump talks about, according to these polling, would be, buying Greenland, making Canada the 51st state. These are things that not a lot of voters are interested in, according to your polling.
Yeah, the Greenland one was a little bit interesting because we have seen some polling in and around it, but we asked it a couple of different ways. One is, do you buy it? And America's kind of split on that, split on it to not wanting to buy it. And we asked, take it by force, which is something the president has mentioned in the past. And Americans are very fervently against that. So the Greenland issues there. Canada, 51st state, that's largely been, depending on who you talk to in the Trump administration, they say it's joking or trolling or something like that. I think America's kind of reacting to it that way. It's not a realistic thing in their minds.
But a very good number for Trump's efforts, maybe Elon Doge-esque efforts to reduce federal spending. 56% say government spending does indeed need to be reined in. That would suggest to me that some of the stuff that was more front and center in the news a couple weeks ago with respect to getting rid of grants for foreign program spending, that kind of stuff, is consistent with what people across the political spectrum want to see Donald Trump do.
Yeah, 56%. To be honest, I think that's a little bit low. Had we polled this, or at least this exact question or similar questions back in January, it was well over 60%. That's why you saw some Democrats in Congress wanting to join the Doge caucus. I think Elon Musk's approach to Doge over the last couple of months has probably hurt the optics of what it's doing. But by and large, 56%, it's a bipartisan agreement that government should be audited for waste, fraud, and abuse.
Scott Tranter, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Next up, are electric vehicles dead in the water? Albert Gore III will join us to talk about the future of the industry under the new administration. More Rising after this.
Terminated Joe Biden's insane electric vehicle mandate, where you were mandated to buy an electric vehicle. You were mandated within just a few years to buy an electric vehicle. How about that? And you know what? They're great, but not everybody wants them.
Love how he says electric. President Trump Tuesday night touted his rollback of a Biden-era rule that set electric vehicle targets for auto manufacturers, a rule he says amounts to an EV mandate.
It comes as the House is set to vote this week to undo several Biden-era waivers that permitted California to set strict car emission standards. Congressional Republicans are echoing the president, calling it another mandate to buy electric. What does all this mean for the future of electric vehicles? Albert Gore III, Executive Director of Zero Emission Transportation Association, or ZETA, joins us now. Al, thank you for joining us. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I was saying earlier, I couldn't have imagined a better moment for you to be here. And I want to jump right into the fact that we are seeing quite a surprise, actually, as it comes to this discussion, with members of the Senate from the Republican side actually jumping in to defend the Inflation Reduction Act. Give us a sense of what you're seeing out there and how that plays into the overall discussion.
Yeah, we've seen, I think, a lot of support for the impact that some of the clean energy credits are having in states and communities around the country. And I think that, with tariffs as a backdrop, it's also, I think, become a little bit more easy to advocate for a more targeted federal investment that has demand signals, is really aimed at moving supply chains out of China and into the United States whenever possible. So, it's taken a little while for that message to come to the surface, but we are, happy to see more support for those sets of policies.
The political changes in the last couple of years are really fascinating. I remember sort of having some criticism of Democratic figures whose response to higher gas prices a couple years back was, well, have you considered getting an electric car? Now we live in a world where President Trump's foremost political advisor and wealthiest supporter is in fact a manufacturer of electric vehicles. We're doing little Tesla demos on the White House lawn. How has that changed? Has that actually engendered any backlash to the whole electric vehicle program amongst liberal-minded people?
Well, I think, Tesla has played an important role in the popularization of electric vehicles over the last decade. It's also driven a lot of economic growth in the states where it's been manufacturing vehicles, selling vehicles, building charging infrastructure. It's crowded in a lot of investment from elsewhere in the private sector through competition, and that's been great. But I think when we think about electric vehicles now, we think about every auto manufacturer. And when we think about EV policies, we think about, how does this impact the industry as a whole, and what lessons, can we learn from the last decade about how to set the United States up for success, to be competitive going forward. So not just Tesla, but, Ford, GM, Stellantis, Toyota, they all have EVs on the market now that are compelling, that are being sold across the country. And, there's sort of a social proof effect when your neighbor buys an EV and all of a sudden the politics fade away and you're like, well, tell me a little bit about it. They have a lot of appeal, which is great. But it kind of takes that firsthand experience, I think, particularly with, long time American car brands having offerings in the market. And we're seeing the effects of that now.
Al, you just said it, every automaker in America. And I would say one of the distinctive features about EVs is that we rely on a lot of imports in order to make those electric vehicles. We talk about tariffs every single day here, not surprisingly. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you see as the impact of the existing set of tariffs that the president has announced on the EV market writ large?
Well, the whole auto market is hugely affected. And a lot of imports are within North America because that supply chain has been built up under, USMCA. And so impacts are, I think, sometimes doubled or tripled up when you have a part that may start in the United States, go to Mexico, go to China, and then end up in a vehicle assembled in the United States. I think that the EV industry in the United States has had a bit of a head start in making a lot of progress and potentially, insulating itself a bit from the broader impacts of tariffs. It's certainly going to have dramatic impacts when you think about things like rare earth metals and steel and aluminum. But the most American-made car in the United States by, the Cars.com does a study every year, is an EV, and EVs have been at the top of that list for many years because there's been such a push to regionalize supply chains. Also state that, over the last 2 years, 70+% of EVs sold in the United States are assembled in the United States. That's, much higher than the industry average, which is about 50%.
One of the issues I've seen, and there's been a lot of reporting on this, is even when there was the charging stations.
Yeah.
Even when there's a conscious desire to do so, Congress allocating $7.5 billion dollars a few years ago to do this, but what they run into is all of these different regulations around contractors and land use and all of that. There's so much, as a libertarian, this really irks me, regulation that gets in the way of even this. This is something clearly expressed by our federal government, that they want to spend money to do this, and it's still so difficult. That's a huge challenge. And are there conversations to be had about simplifying some of those regulations that make it difficult just to build things in this country?
Federalism is a wonderful system. I think, the system, that program, NEBI, was created really to give a ton of authority to states to design their own programs, to create RFPs, et cetera. As an industry group, we certainly gave a ton of feedback on that process, and a lot of it was received. Nonetheless, still, state DOTs receive funding and are responsible for putting money out. There are, I think, a lot of lessons to be learned there as to, why it took a little bit of more time than expected to get money through that process and actually out putting chargers in the ground.
There were zero built still after 2 years. I don't know if it's updated. Maybe there's some have been built by now, but
there have been a lot built, and there were some built, within the first year for states like Ohio that just moved incredibly quickly.
Right.
Other states took their time, and it wasn't like a red state, blue state thing. It was more just about states trying to customize the RFPs and the program to their state's needs. Now we've seen, funding freeze, and who knows what's going to happen there. But charging build out continues rapidly. We're putting over 1,000 chargers in the ground a week across the country. And the thing about fast charging is it really scales up with EV deployment. You can't just go build a fast charging station and let it sit unused. Utilization is really important. So, there's a huge market of companies looking to serve demand for fast charging, and then 80+%, 90% by some measures of charging takes place where people park in the sort of real life experience with EVs.
Still, from a political perspective, it strikes me that permitting reform is an area that maybe Republicans and Democrats can find some common ground on. I assume that everybody wants to get those chargers in the ground as quickly as possible.
No, absolutely. And, permitting for chargers is more of a state and local issue. Mm-hmm. You've seen this in like renewable energy. Sometimes there is a role for the federal government to play in terms of providing a framework or draft permit, et cetera, universal permit. But in general, there are companies. I worked at Tesla for a long time. Tesla knows how to build charging stations really quickly and keep them online. But permitting reform overall, I think, is a major issue. We need to make it easier to build things in this country for many different reasons, but including, to build more clean energy, to build more modern infrastructure. And we were really close at the end of last Congress to a permitting reform deal. I think that's a taller order now, but nonetheless, the issue will remain, I think, front and center until there is a solution.
Mr. Gore, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Next up on Rising, a new economic report just released. Find out how Trump's tariff policy is impacting it. Stay tuned. Well, the Commerce Department released its quarterly report today, reigniting recession fears. The big takeaway is that the economy contracted 0.3% in the first quarter of 2025, the first time since 2022.
Analysts say the decline could be attributed to a massive surge of imports, 41%, and a decrease in government spending.
The surge was in part an effort for importers to beat Trump's tariffs. The president took to Truth Social this morning and wrote, "This is Biden's stock market, not Trump's. I didn't take over until January 20th. Tariffs will soon start kicking in, and companies are starting to move into the USA in record numbers. Our country will boom, but we have to get rid of the Biden overhang. This will take a while. Has nothing to do with tariffs, only that he left us with bad numbers. But when the boom begins, it will be like no other. Be patient."
Meanwhile, Trump signed a couple of executive orders Tuesday to ease some tariffs on car makers. Trump said during a Michigan rally that he was giving car makers a, quote, little flexibility, but ultimately wants them to manufacture in the U.S.
Senior editor at The Federalist, John Daniel Davidson, wrote on X, "Trump's tariffs wars are forcing Americans to confront an uncomfortable truth. Globalism and the free trade it promises relies on industrial slave labor overseas. We shouldn't be okay with that."
Meanwhile, pollster Nate Silver wrote, "The people still defending the tariffs now are the equivalent of people who defended Biden running for re-election even after the debate. The best litmus test I've ever seen for complete partisan hackery."
And
Using no words.
here's what I think is going to get the Trump administration in trouble. So Trump is saying, no, they're working. Hold on. We're going to have companies moving back here. I think that's going to take longer than he's counting on, and we're not going to have the tariffs in place long enough for that to make sense. I've said this on the show multiple times now. If you're starting to do exceptions for car makers and other industries, well, then we're just going to have totally crony capitalism,
Right.
where the government is saying, here's the policy is tariffs. Oh, but okay, you get an exception, you get an exception, and you get an exception. That is going to encourage more intermingling between government and the private sector, as companies will have to go to D.C. to meet with lobbyists to get meetings with the administration so that their industry, their sector, their firm gets a break. That is just going to be the worst of all conceivable circumstances. If you're either do this and have it in place because you're going to see through this policy that will hurt us in the short term, but you think it's important to have the manufacturing capacity back in the United States. I don't agree with that, but fine, that's your policy. Do it. Or please admit this policy is bad and just stop doing it. Don't do it, but then grant exemptions for all the preferred firms. That's going to be like a Soviet type system where you got to know a guy in the office to get the thing. Like, that's going to be bad.
Well, we know where you stand on tariffs. You would like there to be no tariffs.
Zero.
This is where you and I differ. I do think that tariffs have a strategic use if you are targeting, for example, industries that might not otherwise flourish here. You just want to give them a head start. You saw some of this with solar panels in past administrations, for example. I think the larger challenge that we're seeing right now with what's playing out with tariffs, and there are many, let's be clear, is that there doesn't seem to be a plan at all. I mean, who can forget the infamous chart from quote-unquote Liberation Day where there was this blanket set of tariffs set across the entire globe, including places where there are literally no human beings to have a tariff against. I mean, I think this is why you're seeing the roiling in the financial markets. People feel uncertainty, they feel chaos, and it's not clear that this administration really has a plan for why it's doing tariffs, other than that this president is very clear he believes in them. It's also, I think, very striking to note the difference between Reagan-era theories and approach in terms of the financial markets, which really much more huge to where you are, Robby. And
yeah, I know.
It's a very strange flip. But those were the days when it used to be that unions were the ones that were basically saying tariff everything.
Yes. Well, the Republican Party has absorbed a lot of working class, labor-friendly voters, and so it's had to adjust its policies. I understand that. I would point to those old Reagan days as a time period of unparalleled economic growth and greatness, and say that the free trade policies were a big part of that. Again, I can defend the tariffs if it's part of convincing other countries to lower their barriers to trade as well. But sometimes we hear that from people in the administration, but sometimes we hear from way too much from Peter Navarro, who should not even have a job in the administration anymore. He's trying to sabotage the entire economy. He's a degrowther. He wants to set the country back, and he still somehow has a job in the administration. It is really baffling to me. It's because he went to jail for Trump, and Trump feels some sense of loyalty to him for that. But he is quite deliberately, if you go read the things he was talking about and teaching and running for office as a Democrat in the early 90s, it was about sabotaging the economy because he's anti-growth. That is not the mindset we want in a successful Republican administration that is going to grow the economy. Shrinking economy is not good. We want to grow. I mean, these are pretty basic, fundamental conservative values that are correct and don't need to be turned away from in terms of have a good economy that allows businesses to invest and to create jobs, and rising tide lifts all boats. That's good. If we have to build literally everything here, it's going to take so much time to be set up to do that again. Everything's going to be more expensive in the meantime, and voters don't want that. The voters have flipped on Trump over this.
Right? There are certain things that should be made in other countries because they will forever be in a position to make them more cheaply. For example, if they happen to have natural resources that we don't, that allow them to process minerals, for example, we were talking about electric vehicles, minerals, in a way that we just can't do it. We don't have those things here. I think part of the challenge, so there feels like there's no real structured plan in place here. You're literally hearing different things depending on who you're hearing describe the tariffs, whether it's the president or Peter Navarro or really any number of cabinet secretaries. They're essentially saying three things. On the one hand, you have sometimes they say that tariffs are just a matter of philosophy. This is a thing we should do, it's a good thing, and that's the end of the story. You may hear another leader in the administration say, actually, this is about raising revenue. So we should definitely have really high tariffs because we're going to raise revenue, never mind the fact that it's actually revenue raised from American consumers. And then the third thing you hear is actually none of this is real. This is a bit of a pump fake because what we really want to do is just negotiate with these countries. And those three things cannot all be true at the same time.
Coming up, another candidate joins the crowded field in Michigan Senate race. We'll talk to him.
We need a little bit more of that Michigan grit and values in Washington. We've got to fight back hard against Trump and Musk with a hell of a lot more than paper paddles and broken promises.
Abdul El-Sayed is running for U.S. Senate in Michigan. Detroit's former top health official is aiming to replace outgoing Democratic Senator Gary Peters.
The 40-year-old is not a newcomer to politics. He ran in 2018 to become the Great Lakes state's governor, but ultimately lost. All eyes will be on Michigan next year as it's poised to be a prime pickup opportunity. El-Sayed has already earned the endorsement of Senator Bernie Sanders.
Joining us now is Democratic candidate Abdul El-Sayed. Welcome to Rising.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be with you all.
Great to have you. Why don't you start by telling us why you have decided to run for Senate?
Look, it just shouldn't be this hard to live in the most powerful country in the history of the world. It shouldn't be this hard to afford your groceries or see a doctor without worrying about going into medical debt. It shouldn't be this hard to take a big deep breath or drink your water without worrying about whether or not what's going into your body is going to make you sicker rather than give you health. It shouldn't be this hard to look up from your phone because some massive trillion-dollar corporation spending billions of dollars to make sure that you keep looking and not looking your loved ones and your family in the eye. All of these things shouldn't be that hard. And the reason they are is because we have a politics that have been devastated by corporations and billionaires and oligarchs in ways that have our government working for them rather than working for us. And I think right now we see the worst of that in Donald Trump. We've got to stand up and fight back against them. But we also got to remember what we fight for. And I've been in public service in Michigan here for nearly 10 years. And what people are telling me, whether you're in Flint or Detroit or you're up north in the Upper Peninsula, people are talking about what you fight for, whether or not you can build an economy that works for working people, make it easier to start a small business, whether or not they can afford housing or go see a doctor without getting sick. And so we got to fight back, but we also have to fight for a future that works for folks. That's the work that I've been doing my whole career. I rebuilt the health department, restructured another one, done things like erased medical debt for 300,000 people, $700 million worth, put Narcan in over 100 locations in Michigan's largest, most diverse county, built an air quality monitoring network so folks could hold polluters accountable. I think these are the kinds of things we want our government to deliver for us, and I'm hoping to do that in the U.S. Senate.
Well, Dr. El-Sayed, as the former top health official in your state, I don't have to tell you that healthcare and the Make America Healthy Again movement has occupied a central place in a lot of people's minds recently. Tell us what you make of what the secretary has described as an urgent need to take fluoride out of water, his take on vaccines, and how much is healthcare playing a role in what you're selling to the people of Michigan?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. I literally wrote the book on Medicare for All. I think there's a huge trust gap that we've seen when it comes to healthcare. I'll give you an example from the pandemic. People living in America right now, if you need insulin, you worry about where you're going to get your next vial because we've seen the price of it go up and up and up. And then all of a sudden in this pandemic, you've got folks coming to you with a medication that didn't exist a year ago for a disease you don't have, when they've been missing on providing you a medication for a disease you have, a medication you know you need that's been out of reach for you. And so that trust gap that develops when y'all show up on the problems you think are problems versus showing up on the problems that we think are problems has been exploited by people like RFK. There are a lot of things that I actually agree with RFK on in terms of the nature of the problem. I agree that we need to do something about ultra-processed foods. I agree that we need to take on the food corporations that have devastated our food environment. I agree that healthcare should be about our well-being and not the well-being of a pharmaceutical CEO's back pocket because their stock price is going up. I agree with those things. But the problem is this. Every single situation when it comes to pain in our society, what you've seen out of Trump and his acolytes has been an exploitation of the problem to deliver solutions that tend to be self-serving or ham-fisted or chaotic. And when it comes to RFK, it's exactly the same. I think his diagnosis of the problems are right, but I think he's been known to exploit those problems and the mistrust that exists out there to sell what has ultimately been snake oil. I mean, somebody in the midst of a measles epidemic that you have to convince to say that the MMR vaccine is safe and effective and the best single way to protect yourself from measles, they shouldn't take convincing. Similarly, when it comes to fluoride, the issue is not fluoride in the water. Like, if you're serious about IQ, which he seems to say he's serious about, then maybe bring back the lead program that they shuttered at the CDC that, by the way, in Milwaukee, and when they've got a lead problem in schools, they can't seem to get a real answer from the CDC because they shut down that program. So it's the right problems, the wrong solutions. And that's the same thing that you've seen from Trump. He was able to exploit a lot of folks' economic pain to get elected so that he could tank the global economy and then deliver a stock tip to his billionaire buddies who made $300 billion when he finally pulled back on his devastating use of tariffs. So unfortunately, right problems, wrong solutions with these guys.
Keeping on this theme of the health issues in America, one I think challenge for Democratic governance is a loss of trust in institutions and in many Democratic leaders of states in terms of how COVID was handled, in terms of the policies of lockdown, schools being closed for too long, conflicting and contradictory guidance on masks and mandates and all of that sort of thing. I know a lot of our viewers at Rising are very animated about what they would consider to be COVID overreach and a distrust of elites and Democrats, particularly for that reason. What are your thoughts on this subject? This is something RFK Jr. Taps into as well, and I don't, personally agree with everything he has to say on this subject, certainly, but I have also come away, over the last few years with more distrust of experts and elite consensus on health issues because of what I saw happen I'm actually a resident formerly of Michigan. Michigan is my home state. And I was really horrified by how many things were shut down for so long, to include outdoor spaces, mandates, all of that sort of thing.
Look, I certainly understand why folks are frustrated about the COVID postscript. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that that 1.5 million people died of COVID-19. This was a terrible tragedy brought on by a virus. Now, the hard part about this is this. We have now all the information we need. We fully characterize this virus. We understand what we're dealing with. And we can look back and say, there were mistakes that were made about what would have been most effective by balancing all of the other pieces that we should be considering whenever you engage in a public health intervention. What is the impact going to be on the most vulnerable people in our society? What's the impact going to be on our economy? And those are important questions to take seriously. I will also say that we are engaging in a bit of Monday morning quarterbacking. I think what we assume is that this was about public health leaders trying to take power, for their own sake. And I worry that might not actually be giving them the full credit of the situation they were in. A lot of us were looking at a scenario where we had a virus that had never been seen before, that had come out of a country where they were not being completely transparent about the situation, trying to protect people at a time when thousands of people were dying every day. Our hospitals in big cities were being overrun by the virus. And in that situation, it's really, really difficult to make decisions that are going to consider all of the long-term impact of choices. Now, I think we've learned a lot about how to handle pandemics from that situation, but I don't want us to be playing Monday morning quarterback here in the sense that we assume that they then had all the information we now might have. I think that coming out of this experience, moving forward, I think what we really need is governance that we can trust. It's really hard to disaggregate a lot of what came out of the COVID pandemic from who the president was at the time. I think had you had a president where you knew that this man was taking account of the evidence and was putting Americans' lives and well-being up front rather than his political prospects because of the stock market up front, then I think folks would have been able to have a lot more trust in public officials. I think the fact that we had such unstable, rickety, ham-handed, self-serving leadership at the time made it so that underneath there was a lot of disagreement about what to do. Everything got politicized. And what happens when things get politicized is that people tuck into their specific corners. You saw a red state approach and a blue state approach. And what we all want is a scientific approach. And so, thinking about what we've learned from the pandemic, I really want us to be ready for the next one, which is to say, let's take all the evidence from this one and make sure we're ready to go if something like this were to ever happen again. I'm worried, though, right, that right now, again, under the Trump administration, you're seeing a gutting of public health institutions in a time where you have a massive measles outbreak that's growing, a disease that we had thought we'd eradicated a long time ago, and you've got diseases like H5N1 that could, in fact, go human to human. And so this is not the time to pull back entirely from public health. This is the time to lean in and integrate the lessons that we learned from the last one so we can do it better next time if something like that were to happen again.
Thank you so much, Doctor. We really appreciate that perspective, especially from a health professional. We really appreciate you joining the show today.
Thanks for having me.
What's keeping Michelle Obama up at night? Trump might have something to do with it. That's next.
In this current climate for me, it's, what's happening to immigrants. That frightens me. It keeps me up at night, knowing that there's so much bias and so much racism and so much ignorance. I worry for people of color all over this country.
That was former First Lady Michelle Obama speaking out on the Shetty Podcast this week after he asked about her fear of people getting in trouble based on the color of their skin. And as you heard, the current deportations in America are keeping her up at night. Yes, so she also said that was something keeping her up at night. I feel obligated to bring up the fact that Barack Obama also deported a lot of people, as did every other president. And I think there's a little bit of hypocrisy here on immigration when, you're right, there were plenty of deportations under Democratic administrations. This is like when the kids in cages thing became a thing and they're showing you the pictures, and actually the pictures are from the Obama years. Because that is one of the roles of the federal government, is to deport people who are here in this country illegally. I don't agree with every single enforcement action the Trump administration is taken, but we did not just, contrary to what you might think, we did not you, but the viewer, some theoretical person, we did not just magically start doing deportations for the first time when Trump came into office. This is something that has continued under every administration.
I think there's one key distinction here, and I didn't see the whole interview, so I don't know if this came up. The distinction is that the deportations that occurred under Barack Obama were, first of all, they were prioritized in a very specific way that set convicted, that's the key word here, convicted individuals who were described as a threat to national security, a threat to border security, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the focus was on those who had done violent things, and again, they went through due process. What we're seeing here under this administration, and perhaps this is what the former First Lady, my forever First Lady, Michelle Obama, was referring to, is that we're seeing no due process. You're seeing people rounded up. In fact, at the Michigan rally, they played not once but twice that social media video that the administration had put together, with the people with all the guns and the lines of the individuals who are sent to the El Salvador prison. And you're seeing this kind of fanfare, and in fact, it's for individuals who we don't know one way or another. We don't know definitively whether or not they are actually guilty of the things that this administration says they are. It's part of the reason why you're seeing the pushback from the courts.
Well, it depends which case we're talking about. If we're talking about Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the case that has most captured the media's attention, Maryland father, I have very little doubt that this person is a member of MS-13, as the government has suggested and did prove in his initial court case. It's not true that he didn't get due process. He got a process. The government has admitted they should not have deported him to El Salvador. They could have deported him to literally any other country. There was an order not to send him specifically to El Salvador. Fine, they made a mistake on that. They should try to get him back. But he is an El Salvadoran native. He is back in El Salvador. He is affiliated with a terrorist-designated gang. I just saw some additional reporting by the New York Post. If you needed additional proof that he was in fact connected to MS-13, there was a court action with his, I believe it was his wife's father, telling the police, in fact, that he shouldn't be able to see her because he was a member of MS-13 from a while ago. So I think some in the media are looking at this with like rose-tinted glasses, some of these cases. That doesn't mean that people should be sent to some prison without due process. I am all for due process, and I criticize it when it's not taking place. But this case that has really gotten a lot of attention, is really in the spotlight, I think the media may have overreached here.
Well, and it's gotten a lot of attention in part because
they're going to visit him.
Senators
are going to. Why are they going to visit? But does anyone seriously doubt that he is in fact a member or was a member of this gang?
Well,
I
don't know. I haven't seen all of the things that you're describing here, Robby, but I have seen this sitting president use an image of tattoos on his knuckles again and again, which were clearly, very, very clearly photoshopped. I mean, literally, one could have done that at home.
He doesn't have tattoos on his knuckles. That's correct. That is not a piece of evidence.
And so the reason I bring it up, though, Robby, is that it's very difficult to take this administration at its word. And I think it is still to be shown whether or not all of those individuals that were rounded up are actually guilty of the things that they said, and on top of that, whether there was any due process around them. Mm-hmm. I think the issue that the former First Lady is raising is that this is clearly intended to cause fear within a certain community, and she's sympathetic to it.
Yeah, I mean, but there's no, these people are in the country illegally, and there is you might think that's fine for people to remain in the country illegally. There is, if you read public opinion polling on this, right, there is a strong desire among the people. They elected Donald Trump. He won the popular vote, making no secret of what he was going to do in terms of deporting illegal immigrant people. Now, I want to deport people with a process. I don't want to send everyone to some horrific prison in El Salvador. So there are certainly excesses of this that I can criticize, but the MAGA view, the Trump administration view, and the view of a majority of the country is that if you're here illegally, you get picked up, you're going to be sent elsewhere. Like that's the deal. We don't want you to remain here.
Well,
that's the view of the voters.
I definitely don't dispute the fact that he ran on this issue, and it was a significant reason why he was elected. Obviously, there's greater intensity depending on which portion of the electorate that supported him on this issue versus others. I would argue that really it was the economy and people's continued feeling of pain, and also this long-standing sense that the system itself is just not working for ordinary folks. And you've heard people on the left and on the right argue that. Where we are now, though, I think is also important. And where we are is that this administration is still talking about immigration, still trying to make that the top issue of every single day. And the polling shows us that actually they're like, dude, what about the price of my eggs? You know, what are you doing to help make my life better on a regular, everyday basis? And, we keep coming back to this because I think it's true. Cycle after cycle, we always talk about kitchen table issues and not the border, actually, because that's the thing that governs people's everyday lives.
Well, those issues matter too, but
you should be able to
immigration
do all things,
matters
however.
significantly to people, and ignoring the will of the voters on immigration issues has long plagued the Republican Party. The Republican Party establishment wanting to do amnesty type schemes that are just not popular with their own voters, and they've had to back away from it. Well, right. I mean, it can be a policy that I think is good or bad. It doesn't necessarily make it popular or not. On some level, they got to listen to their voters, and I think this is one of those cases where even if you or I don't think it's a good idea to do mass deportations, the people want that. They've elected Republicans to do it. Trump has vowed to do it. So I don't see how they could not, at least some level, do it. Now, Trump's mere presence as the president has actually had an effect on the border and has resulted in fewer crossings, which is a massive win and speaks to what Trump said initially, is that actually we don't need a new law, we don't need a new anything, we just need me. He was right about that one. And this issue specifically, that has proved the border, has improved the border situation, which is to his credit.
You know, we can't come off of this issue, though, without talking about just kind of the basic humanity elements that you're also seeing, you know, play out in the media, including, you know, sending little kids with their moms, or in some cases separating them.
Well, but I mean, that shows the problem, right? It's damned if you do, damned if you don't. I know but I hated those media headlines that were like, 2-year-old being deported. The 2-year-old is not being deported. The mother is being deported. The mother wanted to. It's her baby. Wants to take him with her. I don't think you think either.
No, it's
heart-wrenching. Intervene and
prevent
and capture the kid. That would not be good.
Did you see the story recently that broke about this 2-year-old little girl who has neither her mother nor her father here? I mean, it's to your point. No matter what, it's a bad situation.
It's that is really difficult. That does it for us. That does it for us today on Rising. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you back here tomorrow.